Is 2 hours of exercise a day enough movement? Does light actually matter for health? Why is everyone so obsessed with cold plunges right now? As we wrap up our discussion about Casey Means' book, Good Energy, we'll be tackling these and other questions about areas outside of food that fuel our energy.
Welcome back to AtoZrunning, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach, and remember that you can learn all about what we do here at AtoZrunning, including our coaching services at AtoZrunning.com. And you can find all of the content we like to share on YouTube, Spotify, and possibly Instagram.
Possibly.
I don't know much about that.
Not promising.
So I'm not one to ask about social medias. So have you been listening to our new format? Because we've been posting content in multiple different formats now via our podcast. We have our weekly running news episodes, which are awesome because there's always things to talk about with what's happening in the world of running. And we've been posting weekly-ish episodes on some helpful topic. Mm-hmm. Our intent with AtoZrunning, as you know, is to be as helpful as possible to what makes a difference for runners. And that includes training, that includes health, that includes what else? Nutrition, that includes
our other part, getting excited about the sport.
Well, yes, there's that too. Encouragement and interesting concepts. We just really try to cover it all. And that's why it's called AtoZrunning. But also, we have found that the most valuable things that we tend to do are because of questions that you all are asking or input that you all are giving, comments about things. And so it's often valuable. We always appreciate the interactions. And this is one of those experiments, splitting the content into multiple different episodes. And so continue to share thoughts and reactions if you have them. Do you enjoy this format? Do you prefer it all in one giant episode every week? And those thoughts will be valuable to us.
I was having a meal with a few people last week, and one was saying that they need to make sure that they stay on top of the running news because that's more time sensitive. So they like that it's split so they can make sure that they get to that first. And then I had someone else say, well, I'm really not interested in running news that much, but I'm always there for the main topic. So I like that you split it for that reason, because then I can get to the heart of what I'm hoping to learn. And so I had both reactions to a positive of having them split. So I thought it was interesting.
These were multiple people in the same meal?
They're a family.
See, that doesn't count. Family.
Well, no, it does, because they both listen for different reasons. One listens for the main topic. One really gets excited about the running news and listens to the topic as well, but it's not as time sensitive. So they like having that cut out for them so they can get to that running news.
And if we can get feedback, we take it from every direction, including parents and siblings. All right. So let's talk about what we're trying to do today, because you recall we were sharing in our most recent episode about Casey Means' book, Good Energy, and we were talking a lot about food, predominantly because food is the most obvious part of the topic when you start to discuss things like humans and energy. And Andy gave Zach some really good suggestions during that episode to stop and recorded separate time for this next part of the topic, because it was a substantial enough topic all by itself. And yet, what we find is that many of us are inclined to just focus on the food stuff and not really think about anything else and how it contributes to our overall health, wellness, and energy. And I think it's probably a good thing that we have these split, because it gives you a chance to set aside the reflection on food stuff for a little bit and what else is there and why does this stuff matter so very much. So that's what we're going to try to do today, although it's probably worthwhile to recap a little bit, summarize the previous episode?
Just briefly, Zach. Very briefly.
Okay. Well, let's do that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about movement, light, and a few other things. Recalling now, when we shared in the previous episode the areas that Casey Means in her book, Good Energy, outlines for what contributes to our energy, good or bad. She says basically our habits are either good energy habits or bad energy habits in these categories. And she had 6 key areas. Her areas are food, sleep, movement, light, temperature, and toxicity. And so what we did last week is we talked about the food one, mostly because that's where she spends most of her time as well. And I want to recap that. And I'm going to do it in 10 seconds or less.
Good.
Plus a little. And so the summarizing statement, the whole entire perspective that she gives can be summarized by this quote from the book: promote unprocessed whole foods and discourage ultra-processed industrial foods. And that's it. Because fundamentally, the most unhealthy things that we do food-wise are consuming ingredients that are explicitly known to be bad for our bodies, and yet we regularly ingest them. And then couple that with consuming things that provide little or no substantial nutritional value. And so we're not getting the energy that our cells need from the things we're eating because they don't have the kinds of nutrition our cells need, or they have things our cells explicitly don't need that may cause us harm. Mm-hmm. And those fall into the following simple functions. And this is my brief summary. You are consuming things that assist your cellular function, okay? And so what does my body need in order to perform its duties? And that's micronutrients, antioxidants, or so many things. You're consuming things that help support structure, cellular structure. And so that's like your actual cell membranes and the components that contribute to the right kinds of structures so that things are transporting in and out of cells properly. That's like omega-3 fatty acids, some of that kind of stuff. You're consuming things that promote good digestion. And so now you're talking about the microbiome itself. Well, actually, I guess that's a separate part of the good digestion. But good digestion, including things like nutrient absorption, gut and intestinal health. So now we're talking about things like fiber. And fiber is just the key to good digestion. The right kinds of fiber in the right amounts. And then the next area is the healthy biome, which I probably preemptively said it already. But that includes things like immune function, mental health. Yes, they have tied in studies. I didn't really spend any time on this. But they have tied in studies things like various types of mental health concerns, including something like schizophrenia and depression, with a microbiome composition, such to the degree that researchers have been able to consistently identify by a patient's microbiome. They are given no other information except here's the composition of this patient's microbiome. They can tell you if that person suffers from depression or schizophrenia, among others, but those are the most notable. That is insane to me. It is
insane, yeah.
And yet true. Now, it's not perfect. This is not like a flawless science in those types of things, but it is, the connections are clear. So fermented foods, among other things, like live cultures, yogurt and stuff like that, are really good for your microbiome. And then the last area is we need to ingest things that help construct our body. And so now you're talking about protein synthesis, amino acids, and we need a lot of protein to do those things. And you need a lot of different types.
I will plug again because it is such a good deal, and I have like a personal connection, and I was able to get this really good deal for all of you. I know this sounds so like...
Here's your product. Plug
I know, but I am thrilled about it because one of the superfoods is seafood. And so I would like to let you all have this A2Z40 code for Net to Table Seafoods. It's the best, most sustainable quality seafood on the planet that has the most. No, it's true. It is true.
Denying. It's just. Can you say it anymore?
I know. I'm enthusiastic. But it is my brother's company. He is the owner and fisherman, captain of the crew up in Alaska, getting this seafood straight from the ocean, and it is really good superfood for runners.
So you go to Net2Table Seafoods. Those are all words. Net2tableseafoods.com, and then you use code ATOZ40.
Mm-hmm. And that's for $40 off.
$40 off an order. And here's what seafood does for you. It helps with the safe structure stuff because you get your omega-3 fatty acids, and it helps with the build it up stuff because there's good proteins.
And other things, too, that help with, all kinds of things.
Good
There's
stuff.
Vitamins and nutrients.
So eat your seafood. And you can get it from Net to Table. All right. Let's talk about the next topic. So we're actually going to combine a couple of these categories as we discuss them because they go hand in hand. So sleep and light is the next one. We could address movement next, seeing as we are runners, but we're not going to. And so sleep and light. And the reason these go together is because now we're talking about the body's desire for natural cycles. And there's been a ton of commentary over the years around the association with daylight savings time and time change stuff. And one of the proponents for certain reasons for time changes is because it helps keep the daylight cycle a little bit more aligned for people. And that's not a terrible rationale, although you can also achieve that same end by simply just adjusting the start times of things. So like, who said school has to start at the same time all year round? Why don't you just change the start time of school depending on when daylight is? Now there's a thought.
Don't do that.
You could. There's no reason you can't. It is a funny thing that we have a society that's like bent on certain things just being the way they are, regardless of whether they're good for us. But this is one of them. And so when we talk about light, there's a number of things about light that are relevant to our health. Light exposure helps the body regulate its internal processes. We've known this for quite some time. Not we, Andy and Zach, but like humans. And so this is part of the reason why if you live especially in the northern hemisphere, north end of the northern hemisphere, why winters are really difficult energy-wise is because there's less daylight. Your body responds to that daylight. Your body is actually going to have less active energy in darker hours. And since it gets dark early, you feel less energetic in the evenings. Since it gets dark later, you feel less energetic in the mornings. Really, your optimal time is just lower during darker months. And that's a fact. It's not, there's nothing wrong with you when you're experiencing that. And people are always like, what do I do about this energy? I need to figure this out. No, that's just normal. That's just the way your body's supposed to work. And it's hard to find a way around that when we're in a society that requires you to be productive during those dark hours. So what happens with the light? What's it doing? Well, it signals activity. Direct sunlight tells your body that it's time to turn everything on. And so your metabolism functions better once daylight is up. Your metabolism actually fundamentally doesn't even want to turn on before there's daylight. Some of those kinds of things. And among others. And so we have found that sunlight is more effective at this than bright artificial light. Bright artificial light does help. It does produce the same effect, but it's not as effective as direct sunlight. And you can actually do some studies where you have people in the morning go outside for like 10 minutes when the sun's shining, and people who don't. And then you can measure things like metabolic response and stuff like that. And so it's really interesting.
I often, with my athletes, will say, okay, even if you can't run, try to get outside for at least a little walk or something for the reason of getting sunlight. So let's say you're someone who does your runs early in the morning, 5 a.m., before the sun comes up, or after work when it's dark already. Then I do still suggest on your lunch break, even if you can't go for a run, to go outside for 10 minutes or go for a little walk or something. I've suggested that to many, many athletes just for this fact alone, and not just for running or performance. It's just to feel better and to be able to capture that like minute to yourself for your mental health reasons.
True that. Yeah, and there are certain internal responses that are measurably improved by regular light exposure. In particular, that morning light exposure. And so insulin resistance is one example. And so your body's actual metabolic processes are more effective with regular light exposure. Isn't that interesting? And again, once again, artificial light doesn't cut it. There's all these like, buy this thing that, provides UV light and all this stuff. That's not really going to help you. It may make some small amount of difference, but that's not going to produce the same effects as just getting outside.
Yeah, I don't think it produces the same effects, but I do think it helps. I've used it before. I do think it helps with the awakeness feeling, though. Like feeling like you're actually that it's daytime.
Yeah. Well, artificial light can produce that. That was what the author was getting at. Artificial light can produce that effect of cycle regulation. Mm-hmm. But it's not as effective. Let's talk about sleep then, because now in conjunction with this light cycle, sleep matters. Mm-hmm. And so how much sleep should you get? We'll start there. Signs of prediabetes. And so this is where we start to say what things are connected to sleep. Prediabetes, which is essentially your body's not responding properly to sugar and insulin response, is off balance, can be detected after just 6 days of fewer than 4 hours of sleep a night. 6 days of 4 hours or fewer sleep a night, and you are starting to become pre-diabetic.
Wow.
Isn't that insane? Now that will be reversed.
Okay.
So 6 days of good sleep after, and you'll go back to normal. Here's what doesn't happen. One good night of sleep does not reverse the effects of multiple bad nights of sleep. It begins to. But if you don't continue to get good sleep, then you just keep going on the downward slide.
Okay.
So that's something important. There's been a ton of studies around sleep and like how much, what if you get like an hour of sleep with breaks and you just get 8 hours of sleep throughout the day or something, and it's like, oh, it has the same effects as 8 hours in a row. On certain things, yes, but comprehensively, no, because this is an example of getting 8 hours of sleep throughout the day as opposed to 8 hours all at once does not produce the same benefits in this regard. Also, what happens when you don't get enough sleep? Free radicals, increased free radicals. And free radicals cause inflammatory response. Free radicals harm, they cause oxidative stress. And so that's another thing that is measurable after a single night of less than optimal sleep. 7 to 8 hours is what all the studies continue to say is optimal, but it is not exactly the same for every person. So you're going to have to find your optimal range is going to be somewhere around 7 to 8. But oxidative stress can be measured, inflammatory response can be measured after one night of poor sleep. We've talked about that already on the podcast just recently. Mitochondria are actually destroyed by prolonged sleep deprivation. They degrade and break down, and so the part of that is because of the free radicals. Part of that is because of the oxidative stress. But fundamentally, your body is actually decaying at a cellular level when you're not getting enough sleep.
I think we're always playing that game in periods of high workload. Do I continue to stay up to work on this project? Or do I go to bed? And I've been one to have to wrestle with that. And personally, I have found that I have done better if I do go to bed and then get up in the morning and work on whatever I'm doing. And I know everyone's different because some people are night owls and some people are morning people. But I found that at a certain point when I'm very tired or my body feels like it wants to go to sleep, I'm not as productive. I'm not retaining the information I should. And I'm also not working as quickly. So I do think that there is something to be considered here when it comes to productivity if you do have a deadline or something scheduled.
Yeah, well, in no small part, combine the sleep with the light reflection, and your body wants to be more productive during daylight than during dark hours. And so if it's 10 p.m. and, the sun's down, and you could get up early and start working on some things as the sun's coming up, it's likely that you're going to be able to be more productive then anyway. But the sleep part matters so much because even 1 hour of less than optimal sleep produces significant increases in pro-inflammatory chemicals in the blood. And that's, again, a study that we already shared previously. The study that we shared previously, it was a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, was a study that was cited in Casey Mead's book, which is part of the reason why I was looking at it more closely, too.
And going back to having micronutrients, nutrient-dense foods, a lot of times our sleep is disrupted by deficiencies. And so these all play together. So if you're waking up, you're restless, if you're having a hard time sleeping, if there's aching, which could be injury related or deficiency related, it's good to be able to look at yourself holistically when it comes to problems like lack of sleep or restless sleep.
Yeah, why am I not sleeping well is certainly a question. And it goes both directions. So here's a crazy lab study they did. They took mice and they deliberately deprived half the mice of sleep. And then they took their microbiome, like from their digestive tract, and put it in mice that had been sleeping well and had a healthy microbiome. So they essentially replaced their microbiomes. And the mice that had been getting good sleep immediately started to demonstrate the symptoms of the poor sleep mice because the microbiome. So it goes both directions, right? Poor sleep degrades your microbiome. A degraded microbiome causes the symptoms of poor sleep. Like you see how these things are interconnected, which I think was the point. You see how these things. Okay, well then let's talk about rhythm, because it's not just about getting good sleep in general, but interrupted sleep, as Andy mentioned, is a big problem. And so type 2 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's all have direct links with getting poor sleep, especially over sustained periods of time. And then beyond that, the actual time that you go to sleep matters, and the time that you wake up matters, in particular because of what the mean, no, that's not, what is the middle? Median sleep period needs to be the same or close to the same as possible. So if you get 8 hours of sleep every night, but some nights you go to bed at 9, other nights you go to bed at midnight, those are less effective nights of sleep because they're not a consistent median period of sleep. And here's what they have found. They took people who sleep about the same schedule on weekdays and then a different schedule on weekends, which is a very common thing in most societies because, the weekend, yay. I find the weekend to be the time when I can get to bed early the most often, which I love. But what they have found was that causes some of those internal systems distress, even though they're sleeping in on Saturdays and they're getting possibly even more sleep on Saturday, Friday night to Saturday. But because they went to bed much later and slept in much later, it actually is causing the same kinds of distress that getting less sleep causes.
And if I know our audience, which I know many of you, a lot of you are getting up early on Saturdays to run. And so if you are going to bed late on Friday nights and then getting up early to meet with your running partners.
They're not. Our audience doesn't have that kind of undiscipline.
I mean,
they are disciplined runners to the core.
I'm just saying that, especially with trying to give yourself that kind of stimulus, it's important to be able to prepare your body both with nutrition and good sleep the night before.
Not that I'm trying to make the case against certain running events that people love, but those races where you have to run relays through the night, they're really unhealthy.
But it also is an event.
Just
like it's
saying.
But also
Just
that's every single 100K or
a reflection.
Yeah, all the ultras are that.
I didn't say anything. I just offered a reflection. All right. How about light? How about light at night? Light at night is really bad. It actually alters your hormone signaling. So this is part of what helps you get good sleep, right? Hormone signaling. When the sun goes down, your body starts to have various signals internally saying, okay, it's time to start shutting down systems, time to start relaxing systems. But if you coerce that to not happen, then it makes it even harder to make it happen later. And so watching TV late at night is actually really bad for your sleep.
Also phones.
Which they have found, phones and TV. They have found that screen time late at night. That's why you have things like the auto. A lot of phones have that auto thing you can turn on where the screens dim to less blue colors and more red colors.
Mine turns black and white too.
That's one version of that.
Yeah.
the reason they do that is to help with this, but in reality, it only helps to a degree, because the point is that the flashing LED lights at night.
And also, it is the stimulus that you're getting from your phone if you're scrolling videos, things of that nature. But we're guilty of that too. So we're not coming from a place of saying, "Hey, we're doing the optimal thing." You know, there's times I'm on my phone checking stuff right before I turn in for bed, and I know that it would be better if I put it away 30 minutes before. But
I really like my bedtime routine includes watching some things while I'm brushing my teeth,
which
pretty much every night. And Andy
form of
hates
contention between us.
It does not delay my bedtime. All right, sometimes. Meal timing matters too. We're talking about routines. It's better to eat during daylight. And as a matter of fact, you can study this. If as the daytime shortens, if you just make sure you still only eat when it's daylight, your body is processing those nutrients more effectively, because remember, your metabolism responds to the daylight also. So then if you are coercing, like, you know, waking up early because you have to, and turning on a bunch of lights that kind of somewhat confuses your body into thinking maybe it is daylight, your metabolism is going to still function a little bit better. One of the things that they have found is, like, if you have to wake up super early and start your day, but you can, like, delay breakfast, like maybe eat a little snack, but you delay breakfast until it's a little bit later on, you tend to actually feel better. Like the meal makes you feel better after, if you eat it when it's daylight, than if you eat it like an hour or two earlier when it's not daylight yet. So it's like, you know, can I eat a snack to just make sure that I'm not too hungry, and then eat my actual breakfast later? I might be able to process the nutrients better, things like that. There's a whole bunch of little hacks with that kind of stuff.
From Stacy Sims' book, Roar, it was recommended to eat protein-rich snacks if you want a snack in the evening, which I had found to really help me, especially in training when my needs were higher for recovery and things like that. And I had been drawn to eating treats and carbohydrates in the evening. But when I switched to when I was hungry, you know, having protein-dense snacks in the evening, I felt a lot better and I slept a lot better. So that's something to consider if you are hungry, you know, and it's after the sun has gone down, which most of us do have more life left after the sun goes down, especially in busy lives. I would say, if you're making choices, to choose protein-dense snacks versus carbohydrates, sugary snacks.
Now, in addition to that reflection, Casey Means would argue that if you are feeling hungry between dinner and bedtime, then you're not eating things for dinner that are the right kinds of things. And here's one of the things she talks about. When you eat a meal, and we mentioned this previously, but the order of when you eat certain things matters, because your body will process things differently depending on which nutrients are going through your digestive system first. So you want to eat high fiber and things like protein-dense foods before you eat carbohydrates in a meal, because those things, the fiber especially, will actually slow down the processing of the carbohydrates so that your body will absorb those nutrients more gradually instead of all at once, where you get a glycogen, blood glucose spike. They can actually determine this. So blood glucose spikes are a bad sign, because what that indicates is that suggests that you are it suggests that your body has absorbed a lot of sugars all at once, as opposed to gradually. And so if you eat fiber, like eat a salad, especially a salad that is really high in like leafy greens that are dark greens and things like that. So eat a salad and then some bread, that your blood glucose level won't spike. But if you do the exact opposite and eat the bread first and then the salad, after the meal, your blood glucose levels they spike more, and they go high and then they drop. And so then you feel hungry again sooner, because your body's absorbing nutrients faster than it should, and it's burning through the glucose a little bit quicker because it's not providing an even amount. So there's different considerations here, because you have to take each day kind of what it is. But if you're able to optimize a dinner time meal, the reflection is eat high fiber foods earlier in the meal eat more protein, because you're probably not eating enough protein. Like a good dinner is going to have 40 to 50 grams of protein, literally, and or more. It depends on the person, but they suggest that you should be having like 150 grams of protein a day, potentially, depending on your body weight. If you're a female, probably 150. If you're a male, maybe closer to 200. And so what we find ourselves doing is being hungry in the evening because we did not eat enough protein in the second half of the day, and we're not eating enough nutrient-dense foods. And so then our body's saying, I need more nutrition here. I don't have the nutrition that I need, which, to Andy's point then in Stacy Sims' book, it's still better that I eat something like protein rich than if I'm going to eat something at that point, because once again, if I eat more carbohydrates, my body then is just telling me that's still not what I need. You didn't give me the thing that I need. And so that's what hunger, as Casey Means notes here. Hunger is your body's sign that it needs nutrition. And when you give it things that are not nutritious, when you're hungry, you remain hungry because it still needs the nutrition. All right. Well, there's a lot of commentary around things like, is it healthy to have stretches, like intermittent types of fasting? Every night is a type of fast. That's why you call it breaking fast in the morning when you breakfast. There's a lot of research around intermittent fasting. We're not going to get into that here. The author only briefly comments on it at all. But in principle, the longer periods of time you have between meals tend to help your body regulate how it uses different energy systems for food. And so you have your glycogen, you have your fat storage, different types of things. And so if you are constantly eating small amounts of food on very regular intervals, you prevent your body from being able to better adapt to using stored fuels.
That's like the opposite of the suggestions that we normally get, though.
No.
For runners. Like, you're supposed to eat smaller meals more often.
During the day. But what the author suggests here is that what you want to do to try to help your systems, your body, your metabolism use energy systems properly is you have a period of time where you're eating as much as you want, as regular as you want, as far as like you can eat small things throughout that period of time. That may actually help with some of your blood glucose levels too, depending on what you're eating. But if you do that, then you also want a stretch of time where you're not eating anything, which you're already doing while you're sleeping. The question is, how late are you eating your last calories and how early are you eating your first calories? So if you're waking up at 4 a.m. to exercise and you ate something at 9 p.m. and you're eating something at 4 a.m, that's a pretty small window of time between caloric intakes. She would suggest don't eat within 3 hours of going to sleep if you can help it. You will be able to sleep better if your body has the right amount of the right nutrition. So don't eat within 3 hours of sleep. If you've eaten good nutrition, if you haven't, then your body's going to be begging for more. But then
maybe during a big cycle, your body would have more demands.
It's going to depend. And so training demands will slightly alter this, because if you exercise in the evening, then that's going to totally change how your body is trying to absorb nutrition also. If you exercise very, very early in the morning, that's also going to change how your body is trying to absorb nutrition. So you have to adjust these recommendations to your particular situation, but in principle, that cycle matters. And so considering how am I maintaining a good cycle with my meal times, my sleep time, and all the times in between.
And I think that this goes back to sleep, right? Because a lot of times when we stay up late and we're working on something or we're watching something or we're distracted by our phones, we are staying up late and wanting a snack, right? But we could have gone to bed earlier if these are some mindless media consumptions. So if we go to bed at a normal time, that's going to help us with some of these rhythms.
Yeah. So here are the summary suggestions for these concepts from the author. She says test your sleep patterns to figure out kind of what the most effective and what helps you best. She also says that it's not a bad idea to get some kinds of monitors to find out if you're actually sleeping well throughout the night. Because if you're not, that by itself is a problem and is worth examination. She does mention sleep apnea, as it's a very common issue, and most people don't know they have it. And so it's something worth looking into. Cutoff time for last call for a meal. So have a time where it's like, if I'm trying to go to bed at 10, I want to try to be done eating by 7. And if in order to do that, I need to make sure I'm eating a certain amount of certain things so that I'm not hungry again before bed, things like that. Minimize bright light after dark. Get outside first thing in the morning if you can, especially if the sun is shining. I say that because we live in Michigan and the sun almost never shines in West Michigan. We get about 48% of sunlight in the year. Did you know that, Andy?
Which is all during working hours.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Did you know that, though? 48%.
Yeah. I mean,
we have so much
cloud
coverage in West Michigan. It's crazy. And try to get outside regularly throughout the day. So here's a recommendation that comes from a combination of Casey Means, but also Daniel Pink's work about how our bodies respond to timing and breaks. So as often as once per hour, if possible. This is obviously not possible for most people, but find a way if you can. If you could go outside for 5 minutes once per hour, you will be more healthy, more energetic. Hands down. It's a guarantee. They have studied this to no end, and it's true.
I mean, that's been kind of like socially acceptable for smoke breaks for a long time. So we just get a little sun breaks.
I mean,
normalize that.
You know how schools in California, like K-12 schools, have these like open campus formats?
Yeah, it's great.
Because their weather's so nice, and they have actually found health metrics better for kids who go to school in an open campus format where you walk out of your classroom outside before you go into your next classroom. They are healthier because they have to do that.
But not Michigan kids. When they've tried that, the kids get frostbite.
There is a high school that I have worked with quite a bit that, well, I'll go ahead and name them. There's no harm in naming them. Grand Blanc High School has 2 campuses, 2 buildings on one campus, and students often have to walk between them to get back and forth to class. So they actually have extended passing times between classes because they need enough time to get across. They're actually quite far apart, the buildings. Like there's a whole bunch of athletics facilities in between. And I think it's actually a good thing that they have to do that. I think it is. Okay, let's talk about movement. Next topic. So that was the big one there, sleep and light, because there's just been so much studied on the topic. But movement is, if anything, one of the most straightforward, and I appreciate that. As runners, we're going to enjoy that fact, but also the answer to the question at the beginning is your 1 or 2 hours a day of exercise is not enough movement. Does that distress you and dishearten you?
Let's maybe tell what movement entails first before people freak out about that.
Exercise is only one part of the concept of movement. So they have this phrase, they call it NEAT. And I don't know why I didn't write out what the letters mean, but it's non-exercise something, 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 something. And so it's when you're moving in a regular day-to-day sense, okay? Regular life movement. And so now we talk about things like lifting the laundry basket and carrying it up the steps. We talk about things like
shoveling the driveway,
like mowing the lawn.
Although that's more like exercise.
We talk about things like taking the groceries in and out of the car. These things are really important, and there's a number of reasons why, but we're going to touch on a few of the aspects around this. So sitting for long periods of time is really bad for a lot of things.
And many of us feel it.
Yep.
Like we don't like it. Our bodies don't like it. And we say, I hate long car rides or long plane rides because my body feels like junk afterwards.
Yep. And so even like things like standing desks, you don't want to stand the entire time because that also can be bad, like for your low back. And so what you do instead is you use a standing desk, and then here's how it works. Every hour or once per hour, and you decide how you want to do this, you raise the desk up and you stand for 30 to 60 minutes. Then you lower it and you sit for 30 to 60 minutes. Then you raise it and you stand. Like all these standing desks everywhere. And here's what you see. You see people work the day sitting and then think right at the end of the day, I want to stand for a little bit, and then raise it up. That's not right. Set an alarm, set a timer, and change frequently. Okay, how about this? They found that people who work on standing desk with a walking treadmill thing underneath it, right? So they're walking while they're working. Doing that for some amount of time. It's not the whole time. It's some amount of time every day. They lost weight, significant amounts. And so it's like, oh, look at that. You're actually, just healthier.
Well, that makes sense, though, because going back to an episode we had a long time ago, the ability to boost your metabolism via movement, especially walking being like something that you don't have to, it doesn't disrupt. Like running, you can't do a whole lot else when you're running.
Yeah, and the key here is that the movement is not, it's inherently like calorie burning movement. It does not have to be, but the movement is keeping certain systems in your body functioning better. And so that's why people find that they may lose weight in those scenarios. Here's a quote from the book that I just found to just be so compelling. Our nation has the most gyms in the world, yet we are the fattest nation in the world. Both things true. One, because we don't use the gyms. How many gyms are mostly vacant, mostly empty most of the time? But two, and more importantly, because of the rest of the things that we're doing that are contributing poorly to our health. 25% of adults in the United States are not active at all. Like, don't do regular exercise of any significant sense, even like going for walks. And that's the key. It's about regular movement throughout the day. So 2 hours of rigorous exercise in studies find that it is helpful, but if you sit the rest of the day, it's causing you problems. And so 2 hours of rigorous exercise coupled with regular general movement throughout the day offsets all of those negative things, plus the benefits of the 2 hours of exercise. So I'm not saying the exercise is not helping.
And you don't have to exercise 2 hours a day.
I know. Just,
but
that's
you're
the
just
extreme.
Saying like,
that's
hey,
been used as an extreme example.
Extreme example of exercise.
Yes. Here's one of the reasons why regular movement helps, because regular muscle contraction helps clear excess glucose. And so you've eaten a good meal, you need to move after that meal, and it would be good to do movements that require a bit of extra muscle effort, because it's going to help move the glucose, the excess glucose from your meal, move throughout your body so it gets where it needs to be, as opposed to ending up stored in places because it just wasn't moving enough. So sitting after a meal causes the storage of glucose in unwanted places. You've heard people talk about things like unwanted belly fat. One thing that you find in studies is that people who sit less throughout the day, on average, have less belly fat. That doesn't mean they have less fat overall. The fat is just more evenly spread throughout their bodies.
I do want to mention this because you always tease my family for going for runs after meals.
I don't tease. I just think it's crazy.
But my family has always been one to go on walks or runs after meals.
Yes, which is crazy, because how does the food stay in your belly and not come back up through your mouth?
You have to just have it be a low enough effort.
That's true. Yeah. So 3 simple rules from the author. Walk at least 10,000 steps a day. That's obviously not from the author. That's just like you've heard that everywhere. The rationale for that is because in order to walk 10,000 steps a day, you probably have to be moving somewhat regularly. If you get your 10,000 steps in your morning run, then you need 10,000 more steps throughout the day, because it doesn't count enough just to run in the morning for the general movement throughout the day we're talking about. Get your heart rate up at least 150 minutes a week. You're a runner. You got no problems with that. Lift heavy things multiple times per week, preferably all your major muscle groups. So do things with your arms, do things with your torso, do things with your legs multiple times a week. And runners, I am telling you, you are the worst when it comes to thinking you don't need to do strength work because you spend so much time already exercising. But you are doing yourself no favors if you're not doing at least 2 or 3 days of strength work every week, because your muscle mass is declining after the age of 35, and it will do nothing but decline if you're not exercising it. And running is not enough exercise to address muscle mass decline everywhere else in your body.
Yeah. But like when you say that, we don't want a snippet taken out. So all you snippers out there, don't snip out Zach saying not enough exercise. Well, what I'm saying, it's just a different type of thing. We need to be more well-rounded.
Yes.
That's more what Zach's saying than it's not enough
For your
exercise.
long-term health as well as immediate performance goals, you need to be doing strength work 2 or 3 times a week at a minimum. Okay. And intensity has valuable metabolic benefits. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but the reason the high-intensity interval training craze began was because they started studying how short periods of time doing high-intensity interval work, like at most 30 minutes, produce significant metabolic benefits, like your body's just processing fuel better. And so then they're like, oh, you're probably going to burn fat better, which is true. You're probably going to you're probably going to utilize nutrients better, which is true. And so that's where that originated. And it is all true. That doesn't mean that we're going to recommend lots of interval workouts as a runner, though. Even so, because there's other ways to achieve this, like strength training. All right. A couple of comments about these last 2 topics now. These will be very brief because the author didn't spend very much time on them.
But very
either.
interesting.
Temperature matters because our bodies are healthier when they're experiencing regular extreme temperature fluctuations. So at a cellular level, especially your mitochondria and metabolic function, you are more consistently optimal when your body's experiencing temperature swings. It does something to stimulate mitochondria. And mitochondria do a lot of things for your body, right? They produce ATP with energy. They also help with temperature regulation and some of those things. Well, mitochondria, just like everything else in the human body, when they are stressed a small amount, they respond well by adapting and producing better effects in terms of what their performance is supposed to be, their function. Mitochondria, just like everything else in your body, respond well to small amounts of stress. They respond poorly to large amounts of stress. And they respond poorly to no stress. And so temperature fluctuations help stress our mitochondria as long as they are not too extreme for too long. That's where the cold plunge craze came from, because it's actually true. The cold plunges are good for your body.
Okay, so this kind of makes me feel a little like...
Andy hates it.
No, listen. Okay, so we had a conversation like 2 years ago where all this research was coming out saying that ice baths were useless, essentially.
For what?
It was supposed to be for recovery. But here, let me say this. It is always good to keep learning and growing, because I was like, I really feel that ice baths have done me good in the past. And I've talked to other runners who felt similarly, like we feel better if we do ice baths. And this research was saying it was poo-pooing it, right?
Because, let me say why. The research was saying it's slowing down your body's recovery effects.
But now we're seeing that it helps mitochondria, but maybe isn't helping in the ways that we thought it did for the initial thoughts of ice baths. But when everyone was saying, I think that this is actually beneficial to me, even though the research is saying you don't need to do that anymore, I think that we need to listen. And I think also the same is true with the rolling, because a lot of times people are like, there's not enough evidence supporting that rolling is beneficial. But runners, everyone, I feel like every runner feels benefits from rolling, and there are theoretical / intellectual reasons to do it, because it's breaking up the fascia and what have you, and stimulating the nervous system, all of that. So the reason why I'm saying all of this is because sometimes when we are intuitive and we see all this research, sometimes it's good to say, okay, I feel like this is beneficial for me and I am noticing trends. Maybe we should listen to that.
Yeah, and that's fun, and that's fundamentally the reality. So when you do a study, when you read a peer-reviewed journal published study, always keep in mind, they are not looking at the whole picture. They can't. No good study would look at too many things at once, because it's no longer a good study.
Too many variables.
Right. They are trying to evaluate certain few specific things, if more than one. And that means that you have to look at a full body of work around a topic to generate a clear sense of the pros and cons and then make decisions around whether it's helping. So that goes to the temperature thing here. Cold plunging fundamentally is a way to stimulate mitochondria adaptations. The same thing is true of sauna sitting, of hot exposure. And hot yoga in particular is a known way because, one, it couples movement with temperature exposure, which is valuable. You can't do that as well with cold stuff. You can't move very well when your
muscles don't like
cold.
that.
So what we have found is that it is true. Some amount of regular high temperature exposure, extreme temperature exposure, stimulates mitochondria and helps produce positive adaptations. And so then the question is exactly how much and when. And the ice bath kind of concept, one of the ways that it may have gone wrong is that people spend too much time in the ice bath.
It's supposed to be shorter.
It delays your muscle recovery because it's slowing down some of the systems that help recover muscles. And so if you took that 10-minute ice bath and brought it down to 2 or 3 minutes, you're probably going to get all of the benefits that an ice bath generally will produce with almost none of the costs. And so there's ways of like kind of hacking the system, right? Now, if I wanted to produce what is the best possible balance of things to get my temperature exposure that I should have, what they seem to recommend is 11 or 12 minutes of cold exposure a week total, and maybe an hour of heat exposure a week. And so if you've got access to a sauna, especially a dry sauna, simply because it's a little bit less stressful on your system than a wet sauna in other ways. But, like sitting in a hot tub is good, but in a dry sauna is even better, that type of thing. Get an hour total. So do maybe like 3 20-minute sessions, 2 30-minute sessions, however you want to do that. And then the cold stuff, it's good to have like 3 or 4 days or more where you're just doing a couple of minutes of cold exposure. And they even suggest, because of they have found it doesn't have to be that cold to be beneficial. And so something like at the end of your shower each morning, turn it down all the way to the coldest setting for 1 to 2 minutes. Just do that. And that's going to be enough value to help stimulate your mitochondria.
My sister was saying she does the opposite. How do you feel about that? She
like
starts
super hot
cold.
shower?
No.
Oh, it starts cold and then
she starts cold for 2 minutes and then goes warm.
The exact timing. I don't think they recommended turning it down cold at the end because the timing in the shower matters. Although there's been other studies, and this is where you get into other things, there's been other studies that have found that ending your shower by cooling it down, not like all the way to the cold, they're not looking at cold exposure here. They're just saying if your shower ends on a little bit cooler setting, your body's temperature is regulating down to normal before you leave the shower, that there's some benefits to that too. But that's a totally separate thing, and Casey Means did not cover it here. Okay. Well, we have found in the last topic that the toxicity exposure of day-to-day life in America is also not great. So what can we do to prevent? And this is my summarizing statement of Casey Means' coverage of the topic here is that we need to stop covering ourselves with poison. We need to stop putting poison all over our bodies because that's basically what it is. There are tons of chemicals in our soaps and our hygiene products and our makeups and everything like that. And many of those chemicals are explicitly harmful if absorbed internally. So our skin obviously absorbs some things and not other things. Our skin's pretty good at protecting our bodies from things that shouldn't get into our bodies, but it also has this nasty tendency of just absorbing whatever's on it to some degree. And so there's a lot of toxic chemicals in products. That's why they say things like don't swallow the soap. Like if your kid drinks a bunch of your soap, then you have to like take them to poison control because that's really bad for them. Well, it turns out it's also bad to have it on your skin if it's in large quantities over time too.
Let me just say, I have been going through a journey with this, and it's very, very difficult to find anything especially makeup wise. And it's crazy how many things are added and how many things can cause problems. And
what's your strategy? You have a great strategy right now for trying to figure out.
Oh yeah. So
It's
I have a Google phone. So I talk to Gemini and I can scan the back of products and ask it questions about the ingredients list. And that has saved me a lot of time because I don't have to read every ingredient.
And Google
Gemini
everything.
does it for me. And that was helpful in getting the process going more quickly because it can feel overwhelming because there's like 50 ingredients, it seems, for like a lot of these products.
Yeah.
And I also had to do some evaluation, analysis, comparisons with different products, and that helped me out.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually would recommend exactly what Andy does. I think it is the best possible way we can tackle this challenge without significant effort and time on our parts. And so take pictures of the ingredients list of your soaps, your shampoos, your makeups, everything, and then just run that through an AI and say, what of these ingredients is known to be harmful? And in what ways?
If you ask specific products, it doesn't want to make evaluations because I don't think that it's designed to discriminate against certain exact products. So you have to scan the ingredients list for it to actually give you a good analysis of it. It will give you generalities. No, that's not a word.
Generalities.
If you just put in the name of the item that you want analysis for. But if you actually put the ingredients, then it will be able to give you more information.
All right. Let's touch on a few of those key things here. What are some things to watch out for? The microplastic craze right now is interesting. There's some proof already, but there's conflicting research around it, and so you take that as it is. But one of those proofs that needs more research to really truly, I think, prove out fully. But plastic bottles, food storage, any kind of plastic containers that contain things that we're ingesting regularly are potentially known to be hormone disruptors.
If it says BPA free, does that?
Not necessarily. That's better, apparently, but not necessarily. Flights, this word, you always hear people say this and just in funny ways because it's just such a funny word to say because the first four letters are PHTH. But I think you say phthalates. And so phthalates in cosmetics, it's very common. They're also hormone disruptors and cause oxidative stress. Parabens in moisturizers and creams, which again are very common and alter your hormone metabolism. And so you don't really want those things. Now, when we say hormone disruptor or hormone metabolism, there's two areas that contributes. One is your hormones that contribute to your skin. So like hair follicle, the hormones that address things like hair follicle stuff, there's a name for those hormones, like follicle hormones or something. But that's one. So the surface stuff, but then also when absorbed, they can disrupt other hormones internally. So then you have triclosan, which is another common one in things like toothpaste and hand sanitizer, which raises a huge red flag. If hand sanitizer, which is supposed to kill everything you touch on your hands, and toothpaste, which you put in your mouth, have the same chemical in them, that's a concern. That shouldn't be. So there's something. PFAS, which we are very familiar with here in Rockford, Michigan, because PFAS has been contaminating our water supply for years. They've just recently been discovering this. PFAS is very common it's one of the most common ingredients used to make something non-stick. So like non-stick cookware, non-stick food storage, fast food wrappers almost always have PFAS in them. That waxy substance on the fast food wrappers is combined. PFAS is combined with some other things to make that. Popcorn bags is another one. So anytime you have a food thing that has that kind of waxy surface on the inside, probably has PFAS, unless they specifically say it doesn't. And PFAS is known to cause cancer, like significantly. It's not an association. They have evaluated in many different ways that PFAS has caused cancers, certain types. And at a minimum, if that is still any doubt in anyone's mind, it definitely causes chronic inflammation. So PFAS is not good. And pesticides are not good. And yet, they're on a lot of foods. So you can wash pesticides off of some products. They, of course, recommend that you buy things from farmers markets where it's, organic and natural and they're not using pesticides, just because then you have no risk. Pesticides absorb into many foods, even when they're washed off. But that's a pretty quick summary of some of the toxic things. So let's wrap it up. What are we taking away right now? What are Andy and Zach trying to do? We've already kind of said a couple of these, so we just want to summarize it. We are trying to reduce the processed foods that we are consuming. We felt like that was an area that's not terribly difficult to improve upon.
Yeah.
And I say that, but Andy's doing all the hard work there, and she's doing it amazingly.
We haven't eaten many processed foods since we started this journey.
Yeah, and we already didn't eat a lot of certain kinds of processed foods just out of, because it's obviously not good for you. But what we found is that we actually still were eating mostly processed foods most of the time. Not that only, but every meal had some amount of like significantly highly processed foods. And it's not that hard to reduce that when it comes down to it. It's just mostly being thoughtful. And then reducing added sugar, which is even easier because almost everything has an option that's not an added sugar option. If you get peanut butter, you can also get peanut butter with zero added sugar. So,
but again, we have to look at that because we don't want to have artificial sweeteners added instead.
Yes.
So again, a complication. But once we get the hang of what we're buying, that can be remedied.
Yep. For sleep, I'm working on it. I'm trying. Actually, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but I have been going to bed more.
You're also
times.
trying to get me to stay up later with you.
Not specifically, but sometimes we got things to do.
Yeah.
But going to sleep at the same time, regular time, going to sleep at the same time as each other, since we sleep in the same bed, which was one of the case studies that the author actually evaluated in her book, was someone who the spouses went to bed at different times, and when they started going to bed at the same time, they both improved some health markers. So we're going to try that. We are trying that. Movement. I already try to move regularly, but I have a colleague who has always said like every hour he gets up and goes and does something. So he's not just sitting in his chair for a long time. And so he's like goes and refills his coffee mug. He goes and walks outside for a second and comes back in, like very brief breaks. But I'm like, okay, I can do that at least. That is not hard to do. And then getting outside no matter what.
It's not hard for me because my body tells me not to sit. Like right now, my hips are like, no, thank you.
Yes. However, when you're working on a project, a lot of times you sit there a lot longer than you realize.
Well, sometimes I get up and I like will do pull-ups on the pull-up bar, or I like go do a chore, or I stand up and do some dishes, and then like I do have to get up. Like right now, I'm feeling that need.
Do you do push-ups as well? Do you throw the pull-up bar down on the ground and do push-ups?
I don't.
You should.
Okay.
It's just an easy way to add another layer. Light, more time outside when possible, and trying to minimize screen time when it's dark out. We're looking into that a little bit. But I mean, really,
it's a hard
compromise sometimes. All right, temperature. I am doing cold showers every single day. I'm turning the shower down cold.
You're so
for 2
proud.
minutes.
You're so proud of yourself.
Because it's so easy. It's such an easy adjustment. And here's what happened. The first few times I was like, wow, this is really cold and very uncomfortable. It's not anymore. I actually look forward to the cold part of the shower now. I'm not exaggerating. I enjoy the cold part. And it was just an adaptive period. But like, it is very refreshing. And I can't say for sure if I'm feeling any benefits, but I do enjoy it. All right. And then lastly, the toxicity. Andy already touched on that.
Throwing hundreds of dollars worth of products into the trash was very hard for me.
Yeah, but well,
it is hard.
So this is the hard part.
To do, guys.
We do not suggest you throw out all your food right now. And so finish the stuff that's bad for you, because a little more of it's probably not going to harm you that much.
Well, the skincare is what I'm specifically talking about, because
yes.
I've had major skin issues.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So, and when it comes down to it, if money is not the concern for these types of things, then yeah, get rid of the stuff that you know. Like, look at it and say, oh, I know this is bad for me. I'm not going to finish it. I'm just going to throw it out, because why would I?
Which sounds extremely wasteful, but if you are seeing like direct ramifications from things that you're eating, if it's a particularly bad food for you, if it's like, you know, that you're really addicted to marshmallows and you eat them on a regular basis, like throw it in the garbage, because that's not benefiting you at all, right? But if you have a bag of white rice and you want to switch to using brown rice, like use your white rice before that. You know, it's up to your personal discretion of how you handle making changes. But for me, with some of the stuff with my skincare, I needed to make the change immediately.
Yeah. So now you get a sense of how much you could do, and it is overwhelming. I mentioned at the outset of this, the first thing I did with Casey Means' book is I flipped to the area where she has her checklists of all the things you could improve in all of these areas. And it's like 7 pages straight of nonstop checklists. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is not possible. But then in reality, as I started reading through things, it's not nearly as overwhelming when I just look at one area at a time and I think, okay, it's really slight adjustments. For most of these things, it's small adjustments. But in principle, and here's what it comes down to. If I were to look for what can I improve today, what's reasonable and achievable for me to improve today, and then how many of these areas can I slowly dial in a little bit better in the coming weeks and months, what Casey Means promises, based on her work with clients in these areas, is you will start seeing benefits in a matter of weeks, if not sooner. Like, it doesn't take long to begin to realize some of the benefits of these kinds of changes. And you will see significant benefits in a matter of only a handful of months. And so she talks about clients who come to her who are very unhealthy, who are like at risk of diabetes or actually showing diabetes, who are experiencing some like increase in Alzheimer's or dementia, things like that, like significant things. And after 6 months of dialing in these areas, they are a new person. Not promising this, not saying this happens for every single person every single time. But in principle, when I become healthier, I will notice the benefits. And it's not instant, it's not tomorrow, but it's also not going to take too long. So committing to finding a few things that I know I can improve and then doing so with consistency, that's what we talk about. When we talk about running, when we talk about training, it's making wise choices consistently over time. Mm-hmm. Good training, you're going to get fitter. Good health habits, you're going to get healthier.
Mm-hmm. And for a lot of these things, it's just an exchange. I'm going to choose to eat fruit instead of Sour Patch Kids, or I'm going to choose to drink water first thing in the morning rather than orange juice.
I'm going to stop eating 2 bagels, 2
you already
cinnamon
have.
raisin
You've already
bagels
stopped.
every morning. I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to stop doing that every morning, and I'm just going to eat something better, like oatmeal.
Mm-hmm.
And I am feeling better for it.
Good.
And I'm telling you, it only took a few days before I noticed the difference. And I was never going to tell you that I had a problem with how I was feeling about, based on the food I was eating.
Yeah.
But as soon as I changed it, I was like, oh, actually, this is better. And I would never have known it.
So there you have it. We're still learning and growing too. And that's actually one of the reasons that we as coaches have this podcast, is because we're continually interfacing with new books, new research, new thoughts, because we believe in continuous improvement. We think that we can help you better if we're always in it. And the podcast helps us do that because we explore topics to help runners thrive, like this one.
If you like the kind of stuff you hear here, but you feel like you need a little more direct and immediate personal support with your training efforts, with your running endeavors, maybe our coaching services are the right thing for you at the right time. And so feel free to take a look at what we have to offer there at AtoZrunning.com, or always reach out. And with that, we've got more content coming at you again soon. So stick around, keep tuned in, and we'll keep sharing the good stuff.